for attending to Africa Live. It is 8 p.m. here in East Africa. Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Penina Karibe in Nairobi. Also coming up. Taking back the north, Mali's government troops re-enter northern town of Kidal. A state of emergency is lifted.
We are very much concerned. Very much concerned. I talk to Rhodesia nearly every day.
And Athletics Kenya worried of a world 800 meters champion David Rudisha's injury. We begin our bulletin in Egypt, where tensions between pro and anti-Morsi demonstrators continue to simmer. This after violent clashes on Friday left more than 30 people dead, prompting the United States and United Nations to express their concern. Egypt's army ousted President Mohamed Morsi on Wednesday, with some calling it a military coup and others saying it was a response to calls by tens of millions of Egyptians for the Muslim Brotherhood leader to step down. These are live pictures we're bringing you from Tahrir Square. You can see the masses of people who poured into Tahrir Square. And these have been the scenes for the past almost 1 week now as violence escalates there in Egypt. So let's get more details on the situation in Egypt. We're now joined by CCTV's Famida Miller live in Cairo. Famida, what's the latest?
Thank you very much, Panina. Well, it has been days of transition here in Cairo. Looking at Saturday's events, we've had the interim president, Adli Mansour, assume his duties at the presidential palace. And now this country is also characterized by political instability. And as you mentioned, there are days of violence. And that's the environment in which the president or the interim president has to work at the moment. Now, he's also expected to announce his policies for this transitional period. CCTV's Yasser Hakim takes us through Adli Mansour's first few hours in office.
On his first day, Adli Mansour went into extensive meetings straight away with two issues on top of his agenda: a new prime minister and a roadmap for the transitional period.
For the roadmap, he has put a specific timetable. First, establishing a new constitution and election law, followed by parliamentary and presidential elections. I think the period should not exceed 1 year to be accepted publicly.
The interim president also met leaders of the rebel movement, which triggered the protests that ousted Mohamed Morsi, in addition to representatives of the liberal and Islamist forces, barring the Muslim Brotherhood, to agree on a candidate for the Prime Minister's office.
It will be tough to find someone willing to tackle the extreme challenges, especially the economic and security issues, with the instability still on the streets. The liberals and the youth want Mohamed Baradei, while the Islamists prefer former Prime Minister Kamal Ganzouri.
With the help of the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Interior, Mansour is also discussing ways on how to deal with the continuous street battles and the protests by the Muslim Brotherhood, who refuse to step down unless Mohamed Morsi is reinstated as president. The interim president has crucial decisions in the next few hours that could shape Egypt's future. Experts hope that he doesn't make the same mistakes of the previous transitional period that led to the current situation. This is Yasser Hakim for CCTV, Cairo.
Now, what Egyptians are expecting this Saturday late in the evening is the announcement of the Prime Minister. There's been a lot of to and fro in the last few days as to exactly who that will be. Welcome to our studio is Ziad Al-Aql. He is a senior researcher at the Al-Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies. Welcome to Africa Live. Now, we're looking at this announcement being made later in the day. There's been a lot of discussion and speculation about who it will be. Now, front runner there is Mohamed Al-Baradei. He has been in the spotlight for 2 years now, back and forth in terms of his appointment. And what it looks like in the past is he's avoided official political appointment. This time round, there's talk that he could possibly be the next prime minister. Is that the case?
Well, usually over the past 2 years, Al-Baradei has been approached to actually be a part of a political process, to be a part of the presidential candidates, and he always refused because he never saw these political processes as serious. He always believed that there's absolutely no room for real political democratic change to take place. There is probably 90% chance that he would accept this time, and that's actually a good sign, because this probably means that finally, first of all, finally Baradei will be responsible for policy making, and this means that he actually sees room for real democratic governance in the coming while.
And this is an appointment potentially that will be widely supported?
At this specific moment, yes.
All right, we'll leave it with this for the moment with Ziad Akleh. What we're looking at now are events in Egypt unfolding since June 30th, rather, have left people wondering whether or not this is a coup or whether it hasn't been one. And I suppose now that depends on which side you're arguing. Now we look at CCTV's Adil Marouki, who explores this question, whether or not what's happened in Egypt in the last few days is a coup or not.
The definition of a coup in the dictionary: a brilliant and successful stroke or action. In politics, it is the sudden appropriation of leadership or power by a usually small group or persons in or previously in positions of authority, usually the military, a takeover.
For those who say it's a military coup, I would say, shame on you. The armed forces submitted its force to the demands of the people, and it responded after the people of Egypt took to the streets. There is no military coup in the world that will give power to the chief of the Supreme Court, a civilian. These are ignorant claims.
Facts. On June 30th, Egypt witnessed the biggest numbers of protesters in its history, standing against its president Mohamed Morsi, even much bigger than the 2011 uprising that ousted Mubarak. In both cases, the people took the streets first, then the army joined. But in Mubarak's case, he stepped down and the army ruled the country. No one described it as a coup. This time, the army is not ruling. Instead, an interim civilian president has been inaugurated. Some describe it as a coup.
What happened is a complete coup with all its factors. I respect the army, but when they say no exclusion to any political parties, and then its leaders get detained at dawn, and when they say there's free media and shut down 17 stations.
Morsi's supporters threatened a retaliation plan. Some, including Morsi, said our blood would be the sacrifice because legitimacy and Islam are at risk. The army saw a threat on national security. They detained major political Islam leaders, mostly from the Brotherhood, and shut down Islamic television stations on claims of inciting violence. These are some routine movements of a coup. Remaining leaders of the Brotherhood were invited to discuss the transitions, but they rejected to join.
It's not a coup. The people are the commanders-in-chief of the armed forces and not the president. The people gave legitimacy to the president and now to the army to oust him. We moved fast in millions, then the army answered.
This is a coup. It is a betrayal from Marshal Sisi to the legitimacy of the country. Morsi came with the results of the elections, but they made a coup because they don't want stability and they don't want Islam.
Comparing Egypt and the coup's definition, it was not a small group that organized the coup. It was a big part of society. But it also wasn't successful until the army came to help out and promising not to rule. If a coup neither succeeds nor fails, it could lead to civil war. And Egypt has already seen signs for that. Adil Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
Well, now, following Egypt's suspension from the African Union, the Egyptian ambassador to the African Union has for the first time spoken out against the overthrow of the former President Mohamed Morsi. He said, and I quote, "This event should be seen as a continuation of the September 2011 uprising and should not be considered as an unconstitutional change of government." Let's explore more about what he had to say.
Mohamed Idris says the overthrow of the Egyptian government by the army was not unconstitutional. Instead, it was in response to the calls of tens of millions of Egyptians.
We do not consider it unconstitutional. We in Egypt consider it happening according to the will of the people.
The Egyptian army has announced a roadmap for the country's political future, set to be implemented by a National Reconciliation Committee. The head of Egypt's armed forces issued a declaration on Wednesday evening, suspending the constitution and appointing the head of the Supreme Constitutional Court, Adli Mansour, as interim head of state. In an interview with CCTV at a meeting of the Peace and Security Council, which condemned the change of government, Adri said disrespecting the will of the people would be like working in a vacuum, and urged the AU Peace and Security Commission to address the country's crisis as a unique one.
It was a special case, it was a popular revolution, and it necessitated a special handling and a special way to address it. And at the same time, I emphasize that what's happening now is a continuation of this revolution. It's a revolution in progress.
Idris also insists the army intervened not to impose its own agenda or seize power, but rather to lend support to the people who called for its help.
The army did not claim power, did not assume power. The army supported the different political factions in order to end this status of polarization in the Egyptian society.
What is certain is that the overthrow of President Morsi has left a country deeply divided, and satisfying the will of the people is not going to be easy. Clementine Logan, CCTV.
Now, despite events in Egypt in the last week, some attention is still being paid to the ousted President Hosni Mubarak. His fourth session of his trial took place today, Saturday, at Egypt's Police Academy. Mubarak, his two sons and 7 members of the Interior Ministry are being tried on criminal charges of inciting violence in the 2011 uprising. The presiding judge confirmed he'll continue to broadcast the trial live on television until he reaches a verdict, as it was a right of Egyptian citizens. Mubarak's defense team has requested logs of the Muslim Brotherhood-led parliament. They say during these sessions, the interior minister underwent questioning and members of parliament decided he was not involved in the killings. The 5th session of what's been a drawn-out trial is set to take place on August 17th.
The Egyptian people resolved the entire case. They rejected the January 25th revolution. They know it's a conspiracy. They thought they were achieving something noble, but the Muslim Brotherhood took over. Al-Sisi rescued the country. I know he'll be proved innocent.
I'm convinced of the president's innocence because the papers don't show any orders from the president to use violence or kill protesters. The police are also innocent. All these incidents are made up by very well-known criminals, the Muslim Brotherhood, who broke into prisons.
Now, just before we wrap up the latest updates from Cairo, let's return to Ziad Akil, looking at some of the priorities that the leadership here in Egypt face. One is the economy that's been in tatters, almost practically, and secondly also is security, which is a major issue here in Egypt. How is leadership expected to deal with those two major factors while members of the Muslim Brotherhood are still on the streets, still protesting?
Well, there's absolutely no way to actually start on a real tangible development course while there is that violent political tension taking place. So I believe that with time, maybe a week from now or something, the intensity of the Muslim Brotherhood demonstrations would actually be reduced a lot. And that's probably when the new government or the new administration would then be able to specifically announce a plan for the return to security. But announcing that kind of plan now, while there's people in the street pretty much out of control, is actually one of the reasons for the people not to trust this administration, because whatever plan they will announce, probably the thousands of the Muslim brothers in the street would not make it work. So there is a lot of signs that the Muslim Brotherhood protesters would actually be reduced in number through the coming week, and that's when I think the administration will start considering economic reform and security sector reform as well.
Just very briefly, how quickly do these plans have to be put into place to appease Egyptians?
Well, economic reform has to be put really quickly, probably before the end maybe of this summer. There has to be an clearly announced economic reform plan. Security as well has to be legislated first. There's a lot of arms out of control in Egypt right now. There is a lot of problems in Sinai, which is slipping also out of control in the hands of radicals. There is now issues with water security in Egypt. So there's absolutely pressing demands for these plans to be announced right now, specifically because they will bring a lot of legitimacy to the new administration.
All right, now just coming in is reports that Mohamed al-Baradei is being named Prime Minister. Earlier it said this is what is expected and possibly the right move for Egypt at this time.
Well, personally, I'm one of his supporters. So I believe Mohamed al-Baradei has been very much someone of principle for the past 2 or 3 years, someone who's always very much dedicated to his work, someone who is very open-minded, who is very inclusive. So we need that kind of prime minister. We need someone who does not have any problem with using all the resources available, all the experiences available. It does not matter what political affiliation do they represent.
How do you imagine the Muslim Brotherhood will respond to this news? Does it matter what their response may be?
Well, it matters if it becomes a violent response. It matters if it becomes threatening response. But as long as the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, will not agree to that. The Muslim Brotherhood, of course, would want their old prime minister back. But if they do not find a legitimate channel to actually express this dissatisfaction, then it will never matter, of course, what they think.
Thank you very much. We'll leave it there. We're speaking to Ziad Akhlar. He's a senior researcher at the Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies. Well, that's a wrap from Cairo. We move back to you, Panina, in Nairobi.
Thank you, Famida. You're indeed watching Africa Live. Let's take a break. Coming up. Taking back the north, Mali's government troops re-enter northern town of Kidal. A state of emergency is lifted.
We follow the latest trends in global politics, economics, culture and sport, and how Africa fits into the global picture. You decide what's important.
We need to trade justice. Africa's future will be determined by Africa.
For women's equal opportunity, for a better life.
We have to change something, and it's not the outsiders.
Talk Africa, a new voice for the world.
Welcome back. Suspected Islamist gunmen have killed 27 students and a teacher in a boarding school in the northeast Nigerian town of Potiskum on Saturday. The attackers set fire to buildings and shot pupils as they tried to flee. Several of the students are being treated for burns. Eyewitnesses said some of the victims were buried alive in the attack in Mamudu town, Yobe. Yobe is one of 3 states where President Goodluck Jonathan declared a state of emergency in May, sending thousands of troops to the area. Dozens of schools have been burned in attacks by Islamists since 2010. Survivors said suspected militants arrived with containers full of fuel and set fire to the school. Mali has lifted a state of emergency ahead of the start of political campaigning for a presidential election slated for July 28th. The state of emergency, which handed the army sweeping powers and banned gatherings of over 50 people, was imposed in January following a French-led military offensive aimed at driving out Islamist militant groups that had taken control of the north of the country. The development comes as Mali's army re-entered the Tuareg separatist rebel stronghold of Kidal on Friday. Mali's interim government signed a peace deal with representatives of the Tuaregs in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, in mid-June, paving the way for national elections to take place at the end of this month. Another peace pact, the rebels remain in Kidal, but were required as of Friday to return to their barracks under the supervision of UN peacekeepers, carrying no more arms in public and dismantling all roadblocks. Ethiopian Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn has appointed 8 ministers to different posts. The political realignments were made on Wednesday at the Ethiopian Parliament based on the Prime Minister's proposal. It was said the reshuffle is part of replacing the long-serving ministers of the country. CCTV's Grum Chala has more.
The ruling party, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Party, EPRDF, has appointed ministers as part of what is called the replacement strategy.
After examining the last 2.5 years' performance of the growth and transformation plan and to execute the plan efficiently during the remaining time, as well as due to the succession strategy of our party, we found it necessary to assign high government officials to more strategic posts.
Based on that, the former Southern Ethiopian Regional Administrator, Sheferao Shigute, has now become the Minister of Education, letting the former Minister of the Post, Demeka Mekonnen, to remain only holding the post of Deputy Premiership. The previous Commissioner of the Ethiopian Federal Police, Werkene Gebeyo, was given the post of the Minister of Transport. Other 6 ministers were also assigned to different posts. On the other hand, the most senior leaders of the country, Barakat Simon and Kuma Demeksa, who have served as Minister of Government Communication Affairs and Mayor of Addis Ababa respectively, were appointed as economic planning advisors of the Prime Minister under the rank of Minister.
Based on the proclamation of the duty and responsibility of the Executive Committee, the Prime Minister nominates ministers who lead established ministries, and the House of People's Representatives would approve of the nominees afterwards.
After the appointment, the opposition party members of the country said they find it hard to understand the new appointments as part of the government's replacement strategy. Rather, they said the ruling party is trying to fill the gap created because of the recent major arrests made against corrupted officials. According to the recent IMF estimation, Ethiopia expects a 7% economic growth. However, this economic advancement bases itself on the everyday leadership performance and quality of the government's organs. That is why the newly appointed officials face the reality of sustaining the growth against the ever-dynamic global economic and political situation. Grumjala, CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Let's take another break here on Africa Live coming up.